You were talking about what some of the myths might be of addiction, right? And I kind of already touched on a little bit of the predisposition factors for addiction: anxiety, depression, trauma. Those are the big ones, right? And when I was really young, when I was a young psychology student, I was like 20, I don't know, 21, 22 years old. I met this clinical social worker, and he told me, he says, in my practice, I just figure sick people use drugs. And I was like, well, that's interesting. He's like, when you're sick, you use drugs, right? He's like, when you got an illness, you go to the doctor, they give you drugs, you get better, right? So he said, when I find someone with a depressant addiction, so they're addicted to alcohol, they're addicted to opioids, right? He says, I always look for an anxiety disorder because they're medicating in the opposite direction that they're suffering. So if someone's got really bad anxiety, they're going to drink to try to stuff down that anxiety. They're going to take a pill. They're going to shoot heroin. They're going to do something to go in the opposite direction to quell that anxiety. He says, if I find someone that's using, say, cocaine, right, or speed, he says, I'm going to look for some sort of a depressive disorder. Okay, because again, they're feeling already low and they want to go in the opposite direction. And I thought, I chewed on that for a long time, and I didn't really get into, clinical social work until much later in my schooling. But then, I just keep going back to that conversation that I had with that guy where, like, he was spot on. Like, he just nailed it. Like, people are self-medicating. People are self-medicating with drugs. People are self-medicating with food. People are self-medicating with behaviors, which really creates an expansive definition of the potential for addiction, which is that, is your adaptation becoming disruptive to your life? Because that's the real definition. If we look at the textbook definition of addiction, it really is not an issue until it's beginning to negatively affect someone's life. And at that point, you've got a clinical diagnosis. So when people, our approach really is to sort of bust these myths that there's something wrong with the person, that there's something that is, that it's a moral failing, that it is something beyond the fact that human beings are just trying to find balance in their life. I just, sometimes it's about getting people on drugs. Sometimes it's about getting people off drugs, right? Sometimes you can get people off drugs by getting them on other drugs. There's a balance to be had there. For example, I have a guy, he's not in our addiction program, right? He came to me, 39 years old, and he's really struggling with, kind of like what kind of presents like a sensory disorder. Like, he's just he has like a quick startle response. He has to have earphones in when he does his work or goes into any kind of store or anything like that, because it's just too overwhelming for him. What I got when I was talking to him was that he used to be treated for adult ADHD. About 6 years ago, when he started having kids, he thought, well, I don't want to be on any of these drugs. I'll just go off these drugs. Right? So he went off the Adderall. Well, what ended up happening was he had these classic symptoms of, especially the startle response. Like, if he's really actually like finally focused on something and someone comes up and taps him on the shoulder, he's just like, not being able to walk into stores. Like grocery stores, things like that, because let's face it, if you have adult ADHD and there's like a million stimuli in a store, right? He was completely overwhelmed. So of course, as a behavioral therapist, my first work is, I teach him how to ground, I teach him how to meditate, I teach him how to calm and center himself. Right. And when those techniques didn't work, we started discussing whether or not it might be relevant for him to attempt to go back on the extended release Adderall. Well, a couple of weeks ago, he came in and he's had talked to his primary care physician about getting back on the extended release Adderall, and about 70 to 80% of his symptomology went away like that. Now, it's a controlled substance. Okay, so you do have to, be concerned about those things. I mean, there is potential for abuse in anything like this. So you do your due diligence. You run a max report regularly. You do, you check on people. But in this particular case, I met with him again yesterday, and he's just about got it all managed, and he probably needs to go. We figured yesterday probably needs to go from a 20 milligram extended release to a 25 milligram extended release, and that's going to work really, really well for him. So sometimes you get people on drugs, sometimes you get people off drugs. Sometimes you get people on drugs to get off drugs. And this is where our philosophy really varies quite a bit from the traditional abstinence model. We understand and accept that when people are ill, they use pharmaceuticals to help with that illness, whether that's emotional, whether that's physical, that connecting the person with the right practitioner that can allow them to find that balance through that is just as good as getting somebody off of the drug of abuse and helping them find balance that way as well. And that's some of the myths.